In 1999, a young surgeon from Baghdad named Munjed Al Muderis was forced to flee the country and Saddam Hussein's regime after he refused orders to mutilate a group of draft dodgers who had been brought to the medical center where he worked by Saddam's soldiers. Today, he lives in safety in Australia and is one of the world's leading osseointegration surgeons. He develops fantastic medical procedures which allow amputees to walk again. In this conversation, I speak with Munjed about his escape from Iraq to Australia, his time as a refugee in detention, and Australia's asylum process. I'm Shane Farnsworth, and this is the Escape Sapiens podcast. These conversations are supported by the Andrew von Brown Foundation. If you enjoy them and find them valuable, the best way you can help me out is by subscribing, liking, and sharing this content. And now, I'm pleased to bring you Professor Munjed Al Muderis. I hope you enjoy.
Escaped Sapiens.
So what I want to do ultimately is I want to ask you all the questions in the world about osseointegration and advanced prosthetics. But to start with, I have to ask you about your background, right?
Okay.
So you were a refugee, an asylum seeker coming to Australia. How did you end up in that position? How did you end up a refugee, and how did you end up here, of all places in the world?
Yeah, look, I didn't choose to come to Australia, to be honest. I didn't choose to become a refugee. I didn't choose to seek asylum. I was very comfortably living in Iraq. I even went to medical school, graduated from medicine, and became a junior doctor in Iraq, and never thought about leaving the country. I thought about maybe going somewhere and do specialization and then come back, because I always wanted to live in Iraq. And to be honest, no one live in an environment, regardless of how bad it is, if they're surrounded by family, friends, comfortable with their own surrounding, no one would want to leave their comfort zone. So the last thing I thought about is living in Iraq. However, circumstances changed where in one day I was a medical doctor in the operating theater, a junior medical doctor, where we were confronted with 3 busloads of army deserters escorted by Republican guards and Ba'ath Party members, the Arab Ba'ath Socialist Party that belonged to Saddam Hussein regime. And they brought these army deserters, and they ordered us to abandon the elective lists and start mutilating these soldiers by chopping their ears off. The head of the department refused openly, so they took him outside in front of everybody to the car park, and they put a bullet in his head, as simple as that. Then they turned to the rest of us and they said, anyone share this man's view, come forward, otherwise proceed with our orders. I had to face the most challenging decision in my life. Should I obey the commands and live with guilt for the rest of my life by violating every single principle I was brought up on? Should I refuse and end up with a bullet in my head, or should I run away? And I decided to escape. From there onward, I turned from being a junior medical officer in Baghdad, living relatively comfortably considering the circumstances, to someone who's running for my life, escaping from the authorities of Saddam Hussein. And they came and raided our house, interrogated my mother, and they couldn't find me there because I escaped. And so I had to hide in a village outside Baghdad in the west part of Iraq. And I stayed there for several days until my family managed to gather a large sum of money, US dollars, cash, and forged a passport for me, and they managed to smuggle me outside the country to Jordan.
So had the security situation in Iraq been deteriorating? Was this sort of normalized behavior from the guards at that point? Or was this sort of a real shock and something you wouldn't have expected at that point in your life?
Saddam Hussein, during his control of Iraq of 35 years, have done many crazy things. So the unusual example of atrocity that can be committed to the individual human being, that may sound horrible. It's a common occurrence in Iraq. So it's not that unusual to see some horrific decision by Saddam and his regime to to commit an atrocity or make a decision that would be violating human rights. I mean, public executions were common. People who deserted the army, they used to be taken away from their homes. They would run a sham trial very quickly within days, and then they used to come in cars with loudspeakers announcing that a public execution will be carried out at the Ba'ath Party headquarters in the local suburb, and would encourage everybody to come and watch. And usually they would get the individual victim and gather his family, force them to watch it, and sign a piece of paper denouncing that individual and making them pay for the bullet that shot the person. So it's horrible. These are things that I grew up watching and witnessing. When I was confronted with these army deserters, this was not the first time. That it happened before, in the years before that, but I never witnessed that in person. That was the first incidents where I had to face it myself, and I had to, and I was asked to perform it, and I couldn't be part of it.
Had you then thought about this as a possibility? Is this something you knew was maybe realistic if you were in this field, or is it not? Is it something that was so rare at the time that you hoped you'd never?
Well, look, the occurrence of such acts by Saddam's regime are not often, but not infrequent. So they happened, and they happens on several occasions. I must admit, it never came to my mind that I will be faced with such a thing. So I wasn't prepared for it, but obviously in a matter of seconds I had to make a decision. And my decision was very clear, because I had promised myself before, one of the things that I promised myself, that I would never serve in the Iraqi army. And that was a commitment that I made myself, and several members of my family have made, and they have deserted the army or failed to conscript, because in Iraq military conscription is mandatory. So whenever you finish, so I had managed to get into the training program and managed to escape serving in the army by just the virtue of excelling in my work and making myself being more valuable to the medical fraternity, where I don't have to go and serve in the army. So that's how I escaped. My cousin, who was a lawyer, he was after he despite that in high school he came second rank in the baccalaureate in Iraq, so he topped the country, and he entered the law school, but he deliberately made the law school, instead of 4 years he made it 10 years. Just so he doesn't serve, and then time had to come when he had to graduate, and then when he graduated he ran away and escaped to Germany, so and didn't serve a day in the army. So we had the same kind of opinion about serving in the Iraqi army because of what happened with the invasion of Iran, the invasion of Kuwait, and all the atrocities that was committed against the Kurds by the Iraqi army. So we didn't want to be involved in any of that. So it's based on a principle, and my principle was always that I would not participate in any kind of atrocity that violate the human rights.
But so then on the ground, when this is happening to you and you're in the mix, in sort of in the thick of it, how did you get away from the guards? How did you end up sneaking away? And
so basically it was a theater complex, and there were many people around, so I had to hide in the female toilet. I sneaked to the female toilets and I stayed there for 5 hours. They felt like 5 years. and I was just waiting for the knock on the door in any minute. And obviously they were busy carrying on the operation. So and then when I noticed that there was no much movement happening, I walked out. And the university complex is massive. There are multiple buildings. So I didn't go to the car park because I was worried that my car will be searched. I mean, it was a long shot, but I rather to be safe, so I went to the taxi rank and then picked up a cab, and then from there onward met a friend in Harthia, in a place northern part, west part of Baghdad. And we went to Chili's actually. We had a burger there, and then he basically escorted me to a village where we had another friend, and I stayed at his place in a farm, and then they managed to communicate with my cousin and my mother, and then I didn't even get to see my mum.
Yeah.
And then they gathered the money and the passport, and then they put me on a bus on the way to the borders with Jordan.
And I imagine the whole way there you're freaking out, worried that you'll be caught, or...
Well, if I get caught, it would be execution, basically, because I failed to attend. I was accounted for in theaters on that day, and I failed to perform the procedures, and they, when they came raiding my house, they told my mum that he's disobeying commands, so and that will face serious consequences. And usually, when you disobey Saddam's commands, it's an execution sentence, basically.
So then how did you decide where to go? As in, when you were leaving the country, what was the destination?
So there was no destination. I went to Jordan. Jordan was not safe back then. It was the backyard of the Iraqi intelligence services. So I had to find a place that would take me. And Malaysia was the only country on this planet that would give an Iraqi national with half-decent passport a visa. So I bought a ticket to Kuala Lumpur and boarded a plane, and that trip was going through basically transit in Abu Dhabi, and we landed in Abu Dhabi, and I met in the transit. What happened as we were departing the plane, what you will hear is something that's very unusual. Iraqi nationals were asked by the aircrew to hand over our passports. So they confiscated our passports as we were coming out of the plane in the transit area, which is something that I've never seen. I've traveled all around the world since, and never seen that happen. So these two young men that I met, they looked very, they looked like handymen. They had very rough skin on their hands with a lot of oil under their nail beds. So, and they couldn't speak a word of English. And I sat beside them, and they were very nervous and very shaken by the situation. And I started talking to them, and they realized that I could speak a little bit of English by me communicating with other people. And I asked them the question, and I said, "Where are you guys going?" And they looked at me very suspiciously, and they said, "Why are you asking that question? We are tourists. We're going for holidays." And I looked at them and I said, "Yeah, right. You look very touristy to me. You don't speak a word of English." And then they talked to each other, and then they looked at me and they said, "Well, if you come with us as an interpreter, we can take you with our journey, with us in our journey." And I said, "Yeah, I have nowhere to go, and I ran away from Iraq, so I'm at your mercy, and I will do whatever it takes to help you." So they had a piece of paper with a number written on it, and that was a number of a people smuggler. When we landed in Kuala Lumpur, we got through security. Funny enough, one of the guys, his passport was ending in a few days. And he had trouble going through the checkpoint, through the the passport officer. And I kind of managed to convince the passport officer that I will take him to the nearest, to the Iraqi embassy and renew his passport straight away, because he wouldn't want to let him in. Eventually, they let us through. We picked up the phone, dialed the number, and it was on the other line a gentleman who introduced himself as Mahdi, the smuggler. And that was my first encounter with a people smuggler. He asked us to meet him in a place called Chowkit, which is in downtown Kuala Lumpur. And he said, get a taxi there, I'll meet you, I'll be standing in front of McDonald's and I'll be wearing a hat, a brown shirt, a brown shorts, and you will recognize me. We got out of the taxi and I looked at this guy, and he was blonde, blue eyes, he looked like Steve Irwin. And I started talking to him in English, and he found me ridiculous. And he said, why are you speaking English? Speak Arabic. And he turned up to be an Iraqi Kurd. And he took us aside to a coffee shop. And literally within 10 minutes, he said, where are you guys from? I said, we're from Baghdad. And the other guy said, I'm from the south. One from Basra, one from Umara. And he said, okay, well, give me your passports. And you need to get me, I think it was $3,000 or something each, and I will get back to you tomorrow with your next destination. And I put my hand up and I said, hang on, can I ask you a question? And he said, yes. He said, well, I met you like 10 minutes ago. How do you expect me to trust you with my passport and this amount of money that you will come back? And he looked at me and he got so offended, and he said, how dare you question my credibility? I'm a respectable smuggler, and I have a reputation to protect. And it was like hilarious. And then he said, well, do you have any other option? And I thought about it and I said, no, I don't, and I have to trust you. And he said, yes, that's the way you go. You don't have any other choice. So we handed him over the passports, and obviously that was a very nervous night because I'll be stuck in KL. I can't even go to an Iraqi embassy over there because I'm escaping from Iraq. So we had to put our trust in this guy. Eventually, he came the next day, and he was a respectable smuggler, as he promised. He came with a visa to Indonesia and plane tickets with Garuda Airlines, and he said, and a small piece of paper with a number on it, and he said the next destination is Jakarta. And he wasn't just respectable in coming back, but he was very accurate as well. He said, when you get through Jakarta airport, don't go to the guy with the beard, don't go to the guy with the multiple stars, don't go to the lady with the head cover, go to the guy with a 1 star, and make sure that when you get through, when you hand over your passport, put $100 inside the passport. And I looked at him and I said, hang on, are you expecting me to bribe a custom officer in a major international airport? And he said, yes, do you have a problem with that? And I said, well, I just wanted to check that I heard you correctly. Anyway, and that was the second trip. So we took the trip to Indonesia, and it was exactly as he described it. And it went very smooth. We went through the checkpoint and we dialed the number, and there was a different person called Omid the smuggler this time. And it was in a hotel, a rundown hotel, 6-story building, and we entered the foyer, and there were like tens of Middle Eastern looking people, and the situation was very, very dire over there, and looked like very depressive. Everybody was like depressed, and we started talking to people, and a lot of them have been there stuck for months and months, run out of their money, and living on borrowing money from each other to support each other, and it was very, very bad. And I thought, I'm going to be stuck here. But then the 2 guys with me saved my life, basically, because they started telling people that this guy is a doctor. And I took my keys and went to my room, and I thought, that's it, I'm going to be stuck in this place. And then there was a knock on my door, and opened the door, and there was this guy with a beard, short guy, with a black trousers and black shirt, and he said, you're the doctor? And I said, yeah, I am a doctor. What can I do for you? And he said, well, I prayed to God that God will provide me with an imam or a mullah, and he's coming from Iran tomorrow, and I prayed to God that God will provide me with a doctor, and you're the doctor. I said, okay, I don't put these things together. What can I do for you? How can I help you? And he said, well, I have a brand new boat going to Australia in 2 days, and I want a mullah to help calming the waters and by his prayers, and I want a doctor to look after the people on the boat. So because I'm a caring person, I care about people. I said, well, okay. And the boat is going to Australia, and that was the first time ever I hear about Australia. So I didn't choose to come to Australia, and these people, smugglers, told us where to go, basically.
So the people who were waiting in the room, who are they? Are they wealthy people? Are they people that have also run up against the Ba'ath Party? Are they who gets to this position in life?
People who were waiting in the foyer were people from all around the world. They were Iraqis, they were Afghanis, they were Sri Lankans, they were people from Northern Africa. Obviously, it's very clear that people who got to that foyer would have means, because they wouldn't be able to get on a plane and travel. So clearly, they were well off to some extent. But they were from different backgrounds, different nationalities, different faiths, different genders, different sexual orientation. Like, I'll give you an example, there were some Iranian person who was homosexual that escaped from Iran. There were some Iraqis who were escaping from Saddam regime, from Shiite background or Sunni background, depends on the faith. There were some people from Northern Africa. There were people from Bangladesh as well. So different backgrounds.
And yet they were supporting each other.
Well, they were. I mean, in these kind of circumstances, people support each other, and you can see, like, human beings are human beings, and they can't, they were all together in that situation, and obviously, people who ran out of money were given food, and sometimes some cash to manage. That's, I've seen it with my own eyes. But it was a very, very difficult times.
Was there any point early on in the journey that you? I'm sort of curious. Why did you, at any point, you think that of looking for official channels, or was it just there was no possibility along those lines? And
this is a very important question. As a matter of fact, it's a question that I often get asked, and as clearly the general public are not aware of a lot of the facts and the circumstances associated with how people travel around the world as refugees and how they cross borders. So the Human Rights Convention 1951, which Australia is a signatory to it, one of the first countries that signed to it, declare that in its terms and items that a human being is allowed to cross borders without legal documentation if they are in fear of their life. So Number one, they are not queue jumpers. They're not illegal migrants. These people are refugees and people seeking asylum. Sadly, in my scenario, in my situation, the countries that I went through, none of them are signatories to this declaration and agreement. So neither Jordan nor Malaysia nor Indonesia. And so if I go to the United Nations Human Rights Commission office in Jakarta or in KL or in Amman, they can't do anything to me because there is no way to approach them there.
So there was no official channel there?
There's no official channel through these borders. You can go through Pakistan, you can go through Iran, you can go through Lebanon, and where they have refugee camps. And having said that, if you go through, you need to stay for certain length of time in a medium, in a middle country, and sustain living there in order to apply to the United Nations to be allocated a country that would take a refugee. That can take years.
I see.
So people that go through the official channels are people who, let's say, go on a skill migrant, skill visa to Libya, for example, which happened to many engineers and doctors from Iraq. They went to Libya, they worked there, and during their stay there, they applied. And then they were granted a visa to go to, by plane, to go to America, Australia, Canada, whatever the United Nations allocate them. I didn't have that opportunity. I did not have access to job because I didn't even leave with my papers. I just left with that passport and my clothes on me, and I didn't have a place to stay long enough so I can apply for refugee status elsewhere. The other thing is that certain people who stay in refugee camps, like refugee camps in Iran, for example, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, it is expected that a person that enters that camp as a child die of an old age before they get granted a visa. That's how big is the problem. The refugee crisis is astronomically problematic and difficult because of the number of people that are living in refugee camps. And there are, the last time I checked, there were over 72 million displaced people. 500,000 of them are in urgent need of attention. There was a TV show that I was involved in, which is called Go Back Where You Come From. And the TV crew were going through one of the camps, and I could see on that TV, on the show, that there was a child. A mother came with a child and said, "Take that child, he's sick. Just take him from me." And I could see there are signs of meningitis on this child, okay, from the footage, okay. And I picked up the phone and I said, "This kid need urgent medical attention." And they said, "Yes, the patient, that child died the next day." Okay, so it is horrible, and no one deserves to be left alone and treated that way. So to answer your question in a very convoluted way, I did not have the chance to go into the queue that Philip Roddock mentioned about queue jumpers. Okay, the only queue that I jumped was the queue of these people in the foyer that were waiting for months and months to be picked up by the boat. I jumped that queue because I was the doctor that I was picked to go earlier than them.
So there's a very small class of refugees that are actually being catered for to by the system, really.
Well, I mean, if you give the number of available positions for refugees around the world, is a minute percentage of the refugee crisis around the world. But people take refugees in a different way and different approaches. So if you look at countries like Germany, for example, people think that Angela Merkel is a saint because of what she did with refugees. They took 1.3 million refugees in a matter of a year, while Australia made a big fuss about boat people. They were 28,000 only at the same time. Okay, during the crisis of the Middle East with ISIS, okay, which was displacing like millions of people. There were more than 20 million people displaced in a matter of a year in that region because of the atrocities of this radical organization that did to the population of the regardless whether they were Muslims, Christians, Yazidis, all sorts of ethnic backgrounds, but the way Angela Merkel did it, because it was very smart, because Germany has a very aging population, and she participated in changing that demographic, because majority of these refugees are coming. They are young families with a lot of children. So very quickly she revived the population of Germany. Yes, they're not Anglo-Saxons, they're not white, but they are children, and they will grow up as Germans eventually. While Australia has a different approach to it. Like, we have the deterrence approach, despite that Australia is a massive country with massive resources and very few people living in it, which doesn't make any sense, because our economy, in order to be viable, we need to double our population. We can't do it through natural growth that we have, because we'll never get there. So we need migrants, and we can't keep just taking the PhD holders and the skilled migrants. We need people who will clean the toilets. We need people who would farm the land. So you need different group of people. We can't keep going with the white Australia policy. You need people from all backgrounds in order. And our strength, the strength of any country, is by multiculturalism, and you have different colors, different people, and that's the only way humanity can survive, because by mixing the races, mixing the colors, mixing the ethnicities and the backgrounds, you may have a chance to have peace.
So then, if you were going to make any change to the Australian, let's say, border security and refugee policies, what would be the one change you would make?
Well, change the attitude of politicians and just give them some education, basically. I would educate politicians, because unfortunately, the advice that our politicians get given is ill advice based on deterrence and fear. So number one is that these people that are coming here, they are not terrorists. These people are escaping from terrorism. And these people that are coming here and getting on a boat, they are wealthy. They have, and they are the cream of their. Basically, they had the means to travel. They had the means to get to where they were, and that's why they managed to get to that boat. So they are not here trying to be to live on the Centrelink and deprive the Australian system from their resources. So these are the two wrong things. And what we are doing by having offshore camps, and like when I was in the detention center, the Australian government used to spend $160 per head per night to detain us in Australia. And that was enormous amount of money, big waste, because I met Philip Roddock when I was in the detention, and I said to him, I'm wasting my time here. Why don't you just tag us like you tag criminals, okay? And just let us go to the farm. We will not be able to escape. I mean, you have the technology to do that. We can farm the land, learn the language, learn the culture, integrate with the society, and provide income for ourselves, for the society, instead of getting holiday migrant young kids coming from Europe and using these kind of visas. And he didn't answer that. So now, people who are detained in Nauru and Manus Island, the government spend 400,000 plus per head to detain them per year. And paying this taxpayers' money to prove a point that is ridiculous, okay? And treating these people inhumanely, very cost ineffective, and with no sustainability, because the minute you stop that system, the boats will come. And again, when you talk about the boats and not the boats, the vast majority of overstay visas are arrivals with visas in Sydney Airport and Melbourne Airport. And this, the way the system works, if you go into the airport and you lie on your document saying that you're coming to Australia for holiday, and you pass and then you go to a police station and claim asylum, they will give you temporary protection visa and bridging visa until you are assessed. So the system encourages you to lie. But if you're in the airport, you land or in the border area and say, I want to seek asylum, you get detained. So it doesn't make any sense.
Do you think 20, 30, 40, 60 years down the track, putting ethics and humanity aside, do you think we're going to look back at this time and 2003 and all the troubles in Iraq, do you think we're going to look back and see a huge missed opportunity as a country?
Absolutely. I mean, as Australian, as a proud Australian, I think we're missing a lot on resources. We're wasting a lot of time, we're wasting a lot of money, and we're missing an opportunity. In Canada, the Canadians has done it a completely different way. You can buy a refugee. So if you pay 27,000 Canadian dollars, you can sponsor a refugee. And they created villages that revived cities, okay, by getting refugees, populating this land that is not occupied by anyone, and then generated a viable society. The same thing can happen here. We have cities that are dying. I went to Launceston the other day, and half of the shops are closed because people are leaving Launceston. Okay, why don't we put, refugees there? These refugees, let's say hypothetically, they will live on the Centrelink. That's fine. They still have to spend the money of the Centrelink on something. They have to go to Woolies. They have to buy toilet paper. They have to go to a barber and cut their hair, and they have to go and buy clothes, buy meat, help the butcher. They have to spend that money, and that will generate business. This is the way I would look at it. The strength of the society is from human power. We have great examples in nations close to us, like Singapore. Singapore has nothing. There are 8 million people with a GDP stronger than Australia. I mean, this is ridiculous. The size of Singapore is the size of Sydney, okay? But they invest in their human power. They are a powerhouse, a massive powerhouse that generate extremely high GDP and wealth for the country based on their human beings. And we can do that. We're not less than them, but the way we look at it is all about fear, is all about deterrence, it's all about, we need to have border security. I've never heard of any country that would use their armed forces to tow down boats of asylum seekers. The Americans do it, okay, but the Americans do a lot of crazy things.
So then, let me get an understanding for what was going through your mind when you're on this boat trip towards Australia, because that must have been horrible. How long was it, and what were the circumstances like?
So we took the high seas. So we took the rough waters from the southern shore of Java down to Christmas Island. It was 200 nautical miles, and it was deep waters directly down to Christmas Island. And if we were going to miss Christmas Island, it would take us 2 weeks to get to the mainland, if we would get there.
Did you have food and supplies for 2 weeks?
So we had a lot of baguettes, we had a lot of canned tuna and a lot of Coca-Cola. To be honest, throughout these 36 hours, I didn't have a minute of rest. I stayed awake all the time. I was very busy helping people, putting drips and putting IV lines, so I didn't have a minute of to sit and think. And that helped me because a lot of people were comatose, a lot of people were very sick, and I was just busy trying to help them. And that helped me not to think about myself, because the sea was very rough, the swells were very high, and it was very, very dangerous circumstances. But we managed to get there. And eventually, the skipper on the boat was Indonesian, and as we got to international waters, a boat came from a frigate and joined us, and he jumped on that boat and left. And we were left to face the element on our own. And lucky we had an Iraqi sailor who escaped from the Iraqi Navy that could read maritime charts, and he managed to steer the boat, basically.
And you see the skills that are coming with these people. You have a doctor, you have a naval pilot.
So we were like 165 people crammed like sardines vertically, okay? Mm-hmm. There was no space to sit down. But among us, there were 13 doctors. There were a lot of engineers, there were a lot of people who have skills, and a lot of carpenters, builders, etc. So, and the vast majority of people who managed to get on the boat, they were of young age, working age. And that is very important to know, because these people potentially, if the Australian government doesn't damage them, they potentially can become a positive influence in the society and a positive impact. Instead, what we're doing, we're putting these people in detention centers, traumatizing them, and making them damaged goods.
But so what happens for an engineer or a doctor or someone who was in the military? And I know you're an Air Force reservist, are you? So for these people, when they come to Australia, are their certifications noticed, or do they have to go through and re-educate, or what happens?
Well, there are different specialties and different qualifications. There are processes in place where every individual has to go through. And the first process is that you get a criminal check, and you make sure that you're not someone who's... Can
I ask you then, so you were on a fake passport. How did that process work for you?
Well, my passport was I don't know if it's fake or not, to be honest. To this date, they got me a passport. I say it was like half done passport. That my name and my details on the passport were the same. Okay. It's just the occupation on the passport was changed from a doctor to a handyman. Okay. Basically. But in order to apply, this has nothing to do with the passport, because they take fingerprints. And they go through Interpol, they go through the CIA, they go through all the organizations around the world, which is a common database, basically, from my understanding, and they do international criminal check. So if someone who's well known to be to commit a felony or a crime elsewhere around the world, their prints will be there, basically. So that's the criminal check part. They do medical check to make sure that you don't have TB, you don't have any communicable diseases, or you're sick, and they do a health check as well. That's the first step before you even get to be released to the community. And then once you're released in the community, then you bring your paperwork, whatever degrees you had, and then you go through the qualification process. And the qualification process starts by sitting the English tests, so the IELTS test or the OET test. There are certain tests that you have to go through, and if you pass that test, then you get your degree qualifications recognized. And that's by, if you're an engineer, you have certain qualification tests that you need to go through, and if you pass them, you get recognized based on the level that you applied for. If you're a doctor, there is the AMC qualification, and you sit these tests, and if you pass them, you get recognized as a doctor, basically. So there are processes in place. This applies to every human being that come to this country, not just refugees. This applies to an American, a British, a German, any person that come to this country want to work in their profession, they need to recognize their qualification, and it's a process that's fair and recognized in Australia, recognized in the UK, recognized in America and other countries.
So what happens then to a refugee who's injured? Like someone, for example, who has an amputated leg or who has a medical condition, do they have no chance of coming into Australia? Are they...
While you are inside the detention center, you're outside the jurisdiction of Australia. So the rules doesn't apply. So when we were in the detention center, we had only the clothes that we brought with us. We had no change of clothes. I was given a towel, a pair of slippers, thong, and a toothbrush and a toothpaste. I literally had to borrow a marking pen to start a school. Okay, you have no access. That's in my times. I don't know what's happening now. I can tell you about what happened to me. We had no access to a newspaper, no access to a phone, no access to TV, no access to radio, no access to anything outside outside environment. We had a nurse that used to come once or twice, once every month or once every 2 months for a clinic. A nurse, not a doctor, in the detention center. Anyone has illness or anything, the nurse will see them. His name was Andrew. Okay, and funny enough, he was very cooperative. He was a lovely individual. Okay. If someone get injured, people were, someone was running or doing something and then he hit his head with a pole and he had a big gash on his head. They had a first aid kit. The manager of the detention center allowed me to stitch him up. Okay, I had to suture his head.
So they trusted you were a doctor.
Well, they trusted that I'm someone that can stitch, okay? Because he was bleeding so heavily, they were worried that transferring him to the hospital, which is 200 k's away, okay, will be causing more problems for them. So, bottom line, if someone get injured, they need to be transferred out, shipped out, and then they will be under custody as a criminal in the hospital, okay, with guards on there, and then once the treatment is finished, they brought back into the detention center. That doesn't influence positively or negatively their application for migration. You treat it case by case when the situation happens.
Okay, so the Australian government will accept people who have, for example, AIDS or they're missing a leg, or this doesn't come in at all.
I don't know about HIV, but people who are missing a leg, they can apply for migration. That should not discriminate. I mean, I don't think there is a discrimination about their. I mean, if you have infectious disease, then that's a different story. But and I don't know what's the ruling on that. But person without a leg, they still can migrate. I don't think Australian system discriminate against people with disability of that kind.
So do you remember the moment when you finally felt that everything was going to be okay? Was there that moment that you realized, I'm going to get through this, I am going to be accepted into Australia? Was there a moment then?
Well, you need to define what's accepted into Australia. Until this moment, I'm not accepted into Australia by many people, okay?
But you're legally here.
Yeah, so a lot of people look at me and they say, my peer look at me and they say, go back where you come from. Until now, I've been called by several of my peer that I'm a boat person, and I still get referred to as a boat person. So it defines.
Openly to your face?
Openly to my face. I mean, this is not unusual. You may sound surprised, but this is happening. This happens, and unless we address our racist issues in Australia in the public, we will not grow as a nation. Don't get me wrong. The vast majority of Australians are very nice people. The vast majority of Australians are like the vast majority of people would never accept racism, okay? But there are a minority who are still, discriminating. And I've been discriminated against. I still am being discriminated against to this day by the minority. And that doesn't, make me special. It's this is applicable to many people. I mean, human beings naturally are villagers, and they're tribal, and they want to belong to something, and it gives them a sense of power sometimes. Like Liverpool fans will kill Manchester United fans because they are both living, few hundred kilometers away from each other, same nation, but they still fight because of their tribalism. This is part of their human being basic instincts. Unless we raise above it, unless we have enough level of education and intellect, we will not get rid of our racism. Okay, and that all goes down to the level of education, the level of intellectual ability. When you get to that level, you will raise above discrimination. And some people haven't, and some people will not. And sadly, some people are proud of not raising above it. And that's what creates a problem, because especially if these people have places in power, that can be very dangerous. I have a person in one of the hospitals I work at, in public, spoke to a community of doctors and administrators, and they said Munjed will never be an Australian, openly, despite that I've done everything, to serve this country, and have proven that I'm, as good Australian as any other Australian.
I mean, you're in the Defence Reserves, right? This is.
I served in the Royal Air Force for 10 years. I didn't get the opportunity to travel overseas. I do my fair share. I pay my taxes. I do everything that an Australian should do, or a human being should do in this country. I don't throw stones in wells. I water the plants, and I feed my kids, and I feed other people's kids. The moment that I felt there were two moments inside the detention center. One moment where I felt it's the end, and it's the bottom of the wheel of fortune for me, when everybody inside the detention center was processed, and my name miraculously dropped off the lists of people being inside. And despite that I was accounted for as a detainee, my name didn't come to be assessed and processed, and everybody was processed. And that was a very dark moment. But I worked on changing it. And this is me. I would never take anything for granted, and I would never accept defeat. So what happened, I was taken to a separate location called the hotel, which is for the naughty people, and I managed to, before I was taken, I realized that there is a problem happening here.
What gets you sent there?
Well, I caused a lot of trouble. I did vocalize my human rights and our human rights. There was a clear violation of human rights inside the detention center. People were beaten. People were spat at. People were called names. I was called 982 for 10 months. That's against the human rights. I was not called by my name. No human being should be called by a number. And
is that part of why does that happen? Is that part of policy, or is
I can't comment on behalf of the Department of Immigration, but clearly it was what happened to us was a systematic approach to deter us from persisting in applying for the right to stay in Australia. The only government official that spoke to us was a lady from the Department of Immigration at the beginning, when we first got into the detention center. She said, the Australian people don't like you, the government don't want you here, and you will stay here indefinitely. We don't know when you will be processed, But if you come to us and say, I want to go back, we will facilitate your return as a matter of urgency. And I entered Australian land on the 8th of November 1999, and the first time anyone asked me what was my name was on the 17th of May 2000. During that period, I existed as 982.
This is the whole time that you were there in the detention center itself?
Yes, that was the whole time I was in the detention center, okay? And then I was released on the 26th of August. So, in order to overcome this difficulty that I had when my name dropped off the list, I gave one of the detainees that was processed my mum's number. Mm-hmm. And when they were released, they called my mum kindly. My mum hired a lawyer in Sydney who went to the Department of Immigration and said, this person exists inside your detention, I'm representing them.
Okay.
Okay, and that's how I got represented.
Mm-hmm.
And then, miraculously, within 6 weeks, I was released. Okay, so the day
By the way, did your mum know you were still alive until that point?
Yes, I can tell you that the only reason it took a human kindness, a person. When we were in Christmas Island, we were taken by the federal police, and they were lovely. They took us to a basketball stadium. There were 5 of them, and I even was told the first Australian joke. He introduced me to his deputy, and he said, this tall guy, he was 6 foot something, he showed me his clavicle, and there was a scar over here, and he said, when you get out of detention center, I want you to go to this place called Tasmania. We had to chop off one of his heads and a few of his fingers to look like that. I didn't understand the joke back then, but now I do. So on the 3rd day, while I was in Christmas Island, I was asked by the federal police to join them to intercept another boat as an interpreter.
Oh, okay.
So we left on 2 barges. On one barge was the captain and his deputy, and on another barge was myself with another officer. That officer is a person that I met for the first time and the last time, and hopefully I'll meet him soon. He looked at me as a human being, and he said to me, when was the last time you spoke to your family? And I said, just before leaving Jakarta. And he said, so your parents don't know if you're alive or dead? And I said, no, they don't. So he said, what I'm going to do is breaking the law. I'm putting my job on the line, and don't you dare tell anyone. Mind you, I tell everybody now. And he said, sit on the ground, and he pulled out a satellite phone from his pocket, and he said, this is the phone, call your family, tell them that you're safe. This guy didn't have to do what he did, but he did it because he was trying to help another human being in need of help. And as a result of that, I managed to contact my mum, managed to tell her that I'm safe, and she continued to live till the day I was released.
Oh.
She passed away recently, 6 years ago.
Okay, so she did know that you were finally released.
So she did. No, she came to Australia. She managed to migrate to Australia on a parent-sponsored migration scheme. Okay, that's another story, which is a good story. Okay, because I sponsored her visa basically, and paid for her Medicare and everything, which is fine. So I'm forever grateful to this man that because of him, my mum survived, and because of him, I am who I am now and where I am. And to his credit, a lot of what I do goes to him, because he made me who I am. I decided that if there is a person that need help at any time, any point of time, I would do it, regardless of the consequences, because you may never get that chance again. Okay, and that's why I'm forever grateful for this guy. So anyway, the happy moment in my life, okay, was at 2 a.m. Craig Wallace came to me in the detention center, and in the morning there was a group of people getting released, getting flown from the Derby to Brisbane, but he decided that I shouldn't go with them, and he gave me my visa, and he said, you have your visa, okay, and you can walk out of the detention center in the morning. And I said, okay, that was it. And then they let me go outside the detention center. Everybody was flown to Brisbane. The gates opened, and they said, walk to the main street Actually, as a matter of fact, they escorted me to the main street, and they said, you stop in the stop station, and there will be a Greyhound bus coming from Derby to Broome. You can catch the bus, and then you can fly from there.
What do you have? Do you have money on you?
So I had money that I brought with me. They changed a couple of hundreds, I think, for me, and they gave me the rest. And they said, and I had my own clothes that I brought with me, which was so funny. And I thought that this guy was trying to punish me, but because I caused a lot of embarrassment for him. But what an opportunity he gave me. So I took the bus from Derby to Broome, to Perth, to Adelaide, to Melbourne, to Sydney. And I traveled around Australia thanks to him.
Yeah.
So it was a moment where I felt a great relief. And then the new struggle start is to try to forge your path inside Australia.
And were you able? Obviously, you became a doctor, so
So I was released on the 26th of August 2000. I worked as a toilet cleaner at the beginning, and then I went to the Centrelink, and they helped me with getting my CV, and then I sent my CV to every single hospital in Australia. And within 2 weeks, I got 2 job interviews, and I started working as a doctor on the 1st of November 2000. So I do apologize for taxpayers that I wasted their money for 2 months.